I'm going to try and depress you for about 10 minutes about the state of the world and sustainability, and as a mechanism for explaining who we really are, not in the sense that we're depressives, because this project is all about the power of doing, not talking, which I'll probably disprove by talking for too long. And obviously the editor here behind me is quite fierce. I'll try and do what I can in 30 minutes. But I want to try and just say very clearly to you all about what our values are as a group of people and why we do what we do, which I hope you'll then get a way of understanding, or at least having insights to some of the ideas that are in there. Because there has to be a tangible, practical expression of something that isn't just real estate, or even just community, or even just housing. It's got a deeper purpose, and I'm going to try and share what, for us, that deeper purpose is, so that you can make your own judgment about whether you share any of that. But I'm just saying this is who we are, and this is why we do what we do. So hang on to your hats. There's quite a lot of slides. I'm going to bang through it really quickly, so at least we cover everything. I'll stop on a few points and elaborate a little bit, but I want to try and show you the marriage between values and practice as best I can in 30 minutes. I just want to do highlights in brief, because I think someone said yesterday, 20 minutes in, that I was preaching to the converted. And I never believed that, actually, however, as it were, right on an audience might be about whether... I know I preach, and it is Sunday, so I can perhaps be forgiven for that this morning. But the converted bit, I'm not sure, because I think we talk a lot about sustainability and about climate change and biodiversity and social justice. And I just want to say we really mean it here, and we really want to try and design a project and build a project and help run a project that fits with those values. So I'm going to start today, rather than preaching, by just talking about some of the highlights of this project. So please look at the screen, because it's on there, rather than at me, just for a minute. And then, because I'm going to have to turn my back and look at it. So more homes than there were in the previous scheme, which I think is a good thing, using brownfield land wisely. Beautiful public places and spaces, because for us, public space is how you grow society, how you grow community. It's how you deal with social alienation, reduce depression, address differences between people, is that we privatize space that used to be public, and it makes it harder. And let's make those spaces beautiful, places you can dwell and sit and meet and talk and watch the world go by. Clean energy for all across the entire project. Retain some of the existing buildings and repurpose them so that we keep the memory of this extraordinary site and place, but with new purpose. Defend against riverine flooding in a climate change world. Build a health hub here and have a wider health and well-being program that is associated with that. Make sure this place is connected really well to the town psychologically, physically, economically, culturally. Have here family sports and well-being programs. So this building, we're thinking, will have a bouldering centre, climbing walls, dance studios, yoga studios, juice bar, party hire, and so on, repurposing an existing perfectly good building. Find new ways of getting around in a way that is appropriate in a world of climate change, and for clean local air that's affordable, efficient, minimises the impact on the highways network. Have a series of creative spaces for creative enterprises of all kinds, which is the future of this economy, makers and creatives and entrepreneurs. How to achieve a rapid and just transition to a better sustainable future using the whole project as a place, as a medium for doing that. Create new community and cultural facilities on site. And in order to do that, have a multiplicity of different design talent to work with the town and with us to realise the diversity and character and texture of a really special place, not a monolithic rectilinear series of developer real estate blocks. So that's why we have 9 architects, 2 urban designers, 2 landscape architects, 2 sets of civil engineers, is to capture the magic of Lewis, but in a contemporary way. In the last scheme, they had 1 architect and 1 landscape architect, and I think it showed. I think it would have all have looked like the Premier Inn, but on a massive scale. And I'm not, maybe some of you like the Premier Inn. Actually, it's weird, I'm entitled to have a personal view on this project. So sustainability. Oh, and again, just to root it in place, there's the site. There are master plans of various kinds in the main exhibition. If you have any difficulty interpreting them, and I know that they're written from they're drawn rather from an urban design point of view. We try to make them as accessible as possible by drawing them in different ways. But just to explain, there are 21 different, what are called urban blocks within this site, of different types, different character, 12 different, what we call market segments that have different types of housing offer at different price points, different designs, different tenures to address different housing needs, recognizing that people are different circumstances economically, have different tastes. You wouldn't know it if you look at volume house building, where it's assumed that everyone has the same preference for a particular type of design. So having rooted the principle of expressing sustainability through place, I'm going to talk about what sustainability is now so just please indulge me for a few moments. You can, of course, leave when it gets too depressing. A bit about human nature. We've been toggling around with sustainability for 40 years now, one way and another, in a way that I'll describe, and sort of lose the will to live after a while when you work with these issues. We've been consultants, we've been cultural entrepreneurs, we've been campaigners. And one of the wonderful things about a project like this is the power of doing. It's the power of sort of going, there's too many words, there's too many policies, there's too many conferences, there's too many initiatives, there's too many ideas. How about if, as a town, we decided we were really going to do it, rather than just talked about it? And then when we've done it, we'd go and tell everyone else, perhaps. But let's see if we can do it, shall we? So we're on a mission, and our mission is to build a portfolio of landmark projects of different types. We have another project, which is a new community, which we're calling Nature City, which is for 6,000 homes in a different part of England. And we're looking to grow a whole series of different kinds of projects to the values that I'm about to describe. And for us, we're living in the strangest of times. That this is an existential crisis. This is not just that we can carry on doing what we're doing, but just a little bit differently. We have to design places and economies and agricultural systems and infrastructure for our children and their children in a dangerous world and in a world that's out of control and moving fast. And volume house builders are still arguing about whether you can do a green house. And I'm going to show you a project in a minute, which was Greenpeace's HQ, which was my first building project in 1989. So the idea that you can't, what is that, 34 years ago, maths is terrible, 32 years ago, that you can't do a greenhouse now. We're talking about system change, we're talking about green infrastructures, whole energy systems, movement systems, food systems. And a bit like, if we're not doing it now, when are we? So if climate change, if the scientists are right, when is it that we act on it? When do we decide finally that that means we do things differently? And if we can't do it in Lewis, where can it be done? Well, maybe you'll tell me we can't do it in Lewis, and you know, it'll be what it'll be, but it just feels like this is an amazing site in an amazing town, an amazing situation with extraordinary people that we ought to be able to do it. So if not now, when? If not here, where? This is her. We're married, and so I can be. Yeah, you probably may have. I don't know. Whatever. This is Jo growing up in an ancient woodland. She's biophilic. If you take her out of that environment for more than a few hours, her character changes. And that's where I grew up. My granny lived in the council house 4 from left. And we literally that was our playground, that quarry. We used to climb up those cranes, slither down that quarry side. And there you have human nature in a nutshell. It's that reconciliation between ecology, nature, biodiversity, a beautiful natural world, and the regeneration of damaged communities, economies, and environments. We put the two together through placemaking, and you get something potentially very special, because they're not at all at war. They mustn't be. Human habitat is a perfectly natural thing. We're trying to design human habitat in a natural system. IKEA wants to help 1 billion people to live sustainable lives by 2030. And if you said to me when I was in Greenpeace in the 1980s that an international business would say something like that and actually then try to do it meaningfully, I'd have just laughed in your face, because our job in Greenpeace was to destroy corporate reputations because they were killing the planet. And here you have businesses like IKEA doing more than any government in the world on sustainability and more than most campaigning organizations. It's after the business discipline, brand, focus, relating to customers, procurement, developing new services, new products, investing in renewable energy. They're doing it. When are we going to do it in real places, in towns, in this country? And we had the good fortune to come across Phoenix Rising, and I know they weren't to everyone's taste, but what was rather wonderful about Phoenix Rising was that they were propositional, not just oppositional. So they had this great slogan: we want development, we just want it to be brilliant. And weirdly, everyone always assumes that the sort of creatives and the eco people are a bit nutty, but it was actually weirdly, I think, the South African investors that bought this product that were a bit nutty, because they thought the scheme they'd done was viable. And it absolutely wasn't viable. Even if you thought it was sustainable, it wasn't economically viable. And they did their own master plan with more houses, more density, which we happily talk about, which would have been viable. And they, as a community action group, hired an economic consultant to advise them on it and demonstrated in a few days that without that number of houses, you couldn't get a viable scheme on here. So just tribute to Phoenix Rising, this wonderful creative campaign, underpinned by hard-nosed thinking about what we need in the reality of an economic circumstance. And I don't know if he's in the room, but this is a co-founder, Michael Manelson. Michael claims to have invented the international whaling campaign for Greenpeace in whenever it was, 1932 or something, Michael, over in Vancouver. They just finished trying to stop the Americans from exploding a nuclear device in the Aleutian Islands, and the rusty trawler that we had nearly sank about 4 times and didn't actually make it to the zone. And when they came back, they were like, "We've won that one now, what should we do next?" And Michael went, "I hear they're killing whales, we should stop that." So there he is, sitting in the boat. He's now a property developer. How weird is that shit? We've worked together for 35 years. And what I think is characteristic of us is, weirdly, we're not environmentalists. We were in Greenpeace sort of scratching our heads going, yeah, but what's the saving the environment business all about? Isn't it for people? And what about culture? And what about places and economies and positive solutions? And we love Greenpeace, but it's all like, stop doing this, stop doing that, stop doing that. But once you've, not that we have stopped doing it, I mean, we've been heroically, recklessly fallen short of those objectives. But when do you start doing that, do this. Stop doing that, do this. But some great victories. So this was probably the greatest in 1987, all those years ago. In a year, we managed to get CFCs banned globally. And I don't know if you saw the news on this, but scientists reported a few weeks ago that had we not, the CFCs, the thinning of the ozone layer that was happening, would have caused an additional 2.5 degrees C of warming in this century. And so the action that was taken in the 80s with the foresight of scientists and environmental campaigners, and we really had fights over this with the world's biggest industries, with DuPont and Dow. They were saying that bubonic plague CFCs are used in refrigeration, among other things, and they were saying if we banned them, bubonic plague would come back to Europe. And we made these T-shirts, which was ICI make holes in the sky, and they really didn't like us. And we had these massive court battles and everything. And we just paid an East German scientist $10,000 to invent an alternative to CFCs for refrigeration in a few weeks. And the reason I'm telling you this is both we can win, we thought we were winning, but we're not anymore. And secondly, that don't ever think that the solutions aren't out there. They absolutely are. Innovation, we don't need any new science or even new technology. We need innovation. We need to put these things into practice that we already know. That's what this project is about. This was the Greenpeace building I was talking about earlier on. So we were growing incredibly quickly in the 80s. You know, when I first started in 86, we had 40,000 members. We had 400,000 members by 1989 in 3 years. And actually, the woman that led that growth lives in Lewis. Interesting, quite a few of them are sort of refugees from that period. But we were growing so quickly, we needed a new place to work from. And I bought this building, which was an old animal testing laboratory in Canterbury in Islington. The stench was unbelievable. They had the animals in the back in the warehouse, which is now Greenpeace's Action Warehouse. So it's full of climbing gear and orange boats. And then this building at the front was the laboratory and the office. And we thought, well, we must do a green building. We must refurb it and, you know, good karma for this. But we must, you know, we're Greenpeace. We must have a green building. And then someone was like, fuck, what is a green building? 1989, because no one had done one right at this scale of a commercial office. Excuse my English-French thing. No one had done it. And we're like getting books out of the library. What is green timber? Page 56, you know. Friends of the Earth had just produced a good wood guide. So I'm being told to, but I get carried away. So nostalgia for me. And actually, some of the consultants that worked on, so the secret was hire really good consultants. The secret is hire really good consultants and put them in a good process, good engineers, good architects. The architects that designed that are now world famous as sustainability architects. They've won the Sterling Prize. The engineer that did it, it was his first major sustainability engineering project. He now has a worldwide practice. You'll meet him later, Patrick Bellew, one of the world's leading environmental engineers. Albeit, I have to say, put a Sterling engine, a CHP system, in a shed at the back that we never used because he oversized it. Patrick, if you're here. Next project was this, which was coal mines in South Yorkshire. We rather foolishly thought that we should get involved in regeneration in a very kind of practical way. Became a national landmark millennium project, and this was 2 derelict coal mines with all the coal spoil, acid shale basically on the surface, 400 acres, polluting the rivers and so on. We planted 120,000 trees with community activists over 5 years, and it's now a 300-acre English woodland with the national cycle network going through it. We also built a whole series of sustainability buildings with exhibitions and artworks. That was the entrance canopy. That was the biggest flat array of photovoltaics in Europe at that time in the 1990s. An environmentalist, this was me, I always say this, and it's a joke. This is me in Greenpeace in 1989, walking up and down with a sandwich board. And, you know, but the thing is, whoever was saying that, it's true, right? It's got much worse. Climate change is accelerating, it's not slowed down. The greenhouse gas emissions in the global environment are increasing, not decreasing. Biodiversity is getting, the loss of biodiversity is accelerating, it's not decelerating. And so, I come back to my point, if not now, when? When do we turn these issues around, and how do you do it? You need strategies of all kinds. It's just that we're not, at the moment, in control of tax or government or policy. And it's like, well, okay, what can we do? Well, we can build sustainable neighbourhoods. So I'm going to stop there because I could depress the shit out of you with a whole load of other data and stats, but I'm going to talk a bit more about this project now. So, excuse me, I'm just going to have to bounce through some slides to get there. That's all about Code Red, IPCC, climate. Just on this one, if every new building, new house in the UK was built to passive house standards, it would save 1% of the greenhouse gases. It's irrelevant. What isn't is transport. 24% of our carbon emissions is transport. It's not that we shouldn't do green buildings. We absolutely should. It's just very easy these days. But things like infrastructure and transport are the key. So 24% of your carbon footprint. So we better have a low car, high electric, high walking, high cycling neighbourhood here. Just by that measure, quite apart from local air pollution, affordable movement, making safe streets for our children, and all the other benefits, economic and tourism that come from having a walkable a walkable neighbourhood and a walkable town. A fantastic book of the 100 most cost-effective ways of addressing climate change. And 20 of them we can do in this neighbourhood without blinking. 20 of them we can do in this neighbourhood. Greta Thunberg, we don't want your hope, we want your action, because your house is on fire. I mean, it's a very evocative phrase for this project, isn't it? And this is why I don't think we're preaching to the converted. Actually, not that I'm not suggesting that you're not super knowledgeable about these things. I'm sorry about the hideous slide. But, you know, why is sustainability like teenage sex? Because everyone says they're doing it. Very few are. And the ones that are doing it really badly. And so we think, because we talk about it all the whole time, in real estate, David, isn't it? Every conference you go to, there's some volume talking about sustainability, sustainable placemaking, great design. And you look at what they're doing, it's absolutely not. There's not even any attempt to measure it in any serious way. And yet, when if you really think these issues as serious as I was suggesting earlier on, we've got to be really practical and rigorous and get on and do it properly and holistically across the whole piece. And that is what we're going to try and do here. I promise you that is, well, you may think it's a threat, but I promise you that is what we're going to try and do here. And in terms of, we'll never, ever reach our climate change or ecological regeneration or social justice targets unless we change behaviours. But if you start by wagging your finger at people and saying, look, I know you live in a council house in suburban Lewis, but you've got to give up your car. Forget it. It's ridiculous. You're blaming the people who are least able to make choices. We first have to make it easy for people to make good choices about living well and living sustainably. And again, that's where a project like this can come in. Churchill said, we shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us. They shape human behaviour. Absolutely true. So, for instance, in Copenhagen, where we lived adjacent to it for 4 years, and we had a business there previously for 5 years, everyone assumes that the Danes are born with longer legs and therefore they cycle more. Right? But in the 1960s, it was one of the most car-dominated cities in the world. Now, 57% of all journeys in central Copenhagen are made by bicycle. That's not culture. That's not DNA. They're not born and jump on a. Oh, they are born and jump on a bicycle, but that's because of policy change and design change, and they've just made it incredibly easy and pleasurable and safe to cycle. So what do people do? They cycle. It's not that hard. And when you cycle, the air's clean, it's fun to watch, people are fitter, it's got the fastest growing city economy in Europe because businesses love it, they love their employees being healthy and happy. It works, right? It works. So our job is to create remarkable. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a brandy slogan type thing, I'll move on. So while we were doing the legals on this project, which always take about 1 million years, and you never know you've done it until you've done it, and the ink's dry, and you think you should have a party, but you're too knackered by then to do it. And we already had a team, so we thought we'd better give them something to do. So we asked them to think of the 20 things that would make this project really special rather than just meeting policy, as it were. What would bring it to life? And these are all up in the exhibition, and we'll put all the material behind it on our website shortly, so if you're interested, you can access it. So behind all these, I'm not going to go through them, you'll be grateful for that, but 20 themes, and each of them has a ton of research behind them, of examples around the world of projects, places, behaviours that are working to that theme in a sustainable way that we can use as a reference. It's like a brief, and we sent that to all our architects and designers and said that together with the planning policy and the technical evidence, that's your brief. And then we run this collaborative, it's very multidisciplinary collaborative process. It's full of iteration. So, the street people go, we think the street should be here and the connection should be here. And then the urban designers go, yeah, but if you don't move that street 10 meters over here, then we can't get an efficient housing block in there, so it won't really work. So we have to, and then the guy, Lionel on Views will say, That's blocking an amazing view of the castle, so you just need to move that block 3 meters. And you just iterate and iterate again and again and again until you've got a working hypothesis of your scheme. What's in there is a working hypothesis of our scheme at an early enough stage that you can influence it. And so the big decisions are numbers of homes, type of homes, affordability of homes, and the blend, the mix, the choice, how people move around and how many car parking spaces we have. Because if you love car parking spaces, this isn't going to be the project for you. You don't have to live here, incidentally. We're not going to force you to live here. If you'd like to, we'd be delighted. And if you want to put your name down, but we're not going to force you to. So if you absolutely have to have 2 cars on your drive, we can find lots of volume house builder suburban places where you can do that, around Upfield and Ringmer. They're springing up all over the place, a sort of pox on the British landscape. You can do that. Here, you won't be able to do that. But, it's not that you won't have access to mobility, but it'll be an incredibly walkable neighbourhood. The streets here are going to be beautiful. You can hold me to that. They're going to be walkable, safe, green. Children will be playing in them. Old ladies won't be standing there on the edge wondering whether they can get across without having to write their will. Some amazing junctions in Lewes, by the way, incidentally. We all know, don't we? And you'll hear the hum of renewable energy in the background, because Patrick's going to design as a world-class energy grid. Well, I'll stop there, because I think we should have a debate. I suppose in summary I wanted to say, we are who we are. Excuse me, but we're not changing. Those are our values. They've been our values 40 years. It's about the power of doing, not talking anymore. Let's get on and do it. Let's hire an amazing design team to help us to do it. Let's work closely with the towns so that we do it together, because no developer can make a place. No developer can make a place. Let's make sure we have the right amount and type of affordable housing, the right blend, but don't put your guilt onto this project on affordable housing as a town. I live in the town. I don't know why I'm saying you as a town. We as a town. Don't put it all onto us, because we can solve that easily if we're serious in this town. There's plenty of land and there's plenty of opportunities. Let's just get serious about it. We can do it. We'll play our part, but don't put it all on us, because we're also going to defend the town from flooding, deal with contamination, build high-quality, sustainable cycle routes, and so on. We're going to do that as well. And then finally, it is a work in progress. There's plenty of opportunities to shape it. It will evolve and change, and who knows what the park will tell us we have to do. But it's a constructive relationship, and we'll work as closely with them to achieve the right kind of outcome. But there are certain things for us that we can't compromise on because of who we are. I'll stop there. That sounded like a threat. I'm trying to say it in a nice, positive way. Actually, I didn't say how easy. Passive house is actually really difficult, and it's quite expensive, and I'm not sure it always leads to the best houses, actually. It's not that we won't do some passive houses, but no, it won't be a standard across the piece. I did say greenhouses and low-carbon houses, which you absolutely can do. But one of the things that we will be looking at very closely, indeed are looking at very closely, is low-impact materials. And so Material Cultures, who have got a stand there, it's a fantastic group of architects, women architects, primarily from London, who wanted to build in inherently sustainable materials, and then found that the male-dominated construction industry couldn't do it for them, so they were like, well, we'll just have our own construction company then. So they designed these kind of construction systems with inherently everything that they deal with is low-processed natural materials, and that will have a much more profound impact just in the building than passive would. But we will have a renewable energy infrastructure so that all the heat and power will be renewable, so zero carbon, effectively, and there will be so similar objective achieved in slightly different ways.
And I would just build on that by saying that, yes, obviously the impact of the home and the building itself is very important, but I think what's often missed in so-called green developments is actually the whole lifestyle that they allow, enable, support, or actually disable. And so going back to Jonathan's pie chart, for example, with 24% of the emissions being from travel, if you only had passive house and you weren't enabling lower carbon travel, then the net impact of that is minimal. So I think it's both looking at the built form, but also the whole lifestyle. So we need to do both, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, actually, the first one is in the first part of what you said, Oliver, actually, where you said, I hope it happens. I don't want your hope, I want your action. I mean that. So, you know, if you like the idea of what we're doing here, and or you've got an enterprise, or you've got someone that wants to rent, buy a house, set up a business, run a music evening, for which, thank you, it was amazing. We loved it last night. So we don't want your hope, we want your action, and thank you for doing it. That's the first thing. The second thing is the barriers will be, first it's planning. So planning policy is at a sort of meta level, and this is very tangible. And so the marriage between the tangible and the meta, there are lots of different interpretations about heritage. You heard Richard speaking earlier, some of you, about density, about height, about... Usually with our projects, the local authority tells us to have more car parking spaces, and usually it's the other way around, that the developers ask the local authority to give them more car parking spaces. That's one. Two will be, second would be, I suppose, the blend. So we think so because we're eco-nutters, see what I did there? We are really hard-nosed on economic viability. We have to be, or we wouldn't breathe. And so as I gave the example of Phoenix Rising doing their numbers in a way that the previous developer hadn't properly, actually, weirdly. So we think we have a scheme here that is viable. So you get the blend of repurposing existing buildings, big tick in sustainability, but in having a mixed-use, high-quality neighbourhood, you really want that. To not having so many parking spaces on the street, at least, frees up land for housing, interestingly. Big decision, big move. Three, the massing and height of the buildings gives us we think it's a very lovely way to build and a very sustainable way to build, but again, not to everyone's taste. Massive decision. So the blend between those elements overall determine viability, and it will be clear in conversations with key stakeholders in the park by about the end of the year, whether we're on the right page. In terms of, so that's going to be the biggest one. And so, as I say, if you like some of our ideas and you want to get behind this project, you need to be really noisy, and we want to hear your ideas anyway. But you need to speak up for what you want, and because the people that don't want these things do actually. Whereas we've got a lot of people coming through an exhibition like this, an event like this, that really like aspects of it, and then you never hear from them again because they just assume that we're going to do it, and the world is a little bit inimical to the sort of innovation that we need to achieve here. So we need your help. So the barriers are weirdly institutional. The funding, not as much of a barrier as people might think. In a sense, there's a lot of money moving into sustainability in business. There's always been a lot of money in land and real estate. We just have to find the right blend of debt and investors and asset backers who are aligned with our values. So they're not always we definitely can't be controlled by money, and we're not, incidentally. We have amazing investors. We need to have control of the product and get the investment into what we want to do, not in what the investors want to do. That's it, and I can't say we're anything like 100% there, but we're tooled up with good people. Yeah, thank you. Let me just pick one example then, if I may, to illustrate a wider possibility. So on cycling, so I don't know if you've picked up from the plan, but there will be a dedicated cycle and pedestrian route that goes all the way across a new bridge onto the other side, dedicated pedestrian and cycle. That has its own ramp coming off the Belvedere on top of the floodwall, that beautiful new kind of highline type walk. That comes down a gentle ramp, still dedicated to cyclists and pedestrians, goes along the green wall, below the green wall, and comes to Eastgate. So you've been cycling beautifully and healthily and enjoyably and everything, and then you get killed on Eastgate as you hit that connection. And I'm sorry about that. Just one of those things. And so the important thing to do, clearly, is as you're suggesting, is to do some work with the county in regard to that area. And we've begun those conversations about how that network can then connect into town. And one of the things that we have to be, we can't be presumptuous in that regard. Our job is here, and we'll do our best to connect and stitch and knit and so on. And then the rest of the town and the county has to do its bit to support us in that. But we had a great meeting, actually, I have to say, with them just last week, the first high-level powwow about these things. I don't know if you picked up, we're talking about a co-mobility hub just here, where vehicles would come straight off the causeway into that space and stay there. So they don't have to go round the gyratory or down North Street and in, which makes these streets incredibly... will actually reduce the traffic impact net effect on Lewes, even when this is finished. And we'll prove that in numbers soon, or at least they'd better, our consultants. And so there's an opportunity to rework that Eastgate Junction. I mean, it's got a lovely palm tree on it, so it's kind of fine now. But we need to redesign that particular space, of course, and get that link off the causeway. But they were really keen on the co-mobility hub as a principle, because it has to have a fantastic electric car share, car hire and car club. You've got to be able to go on an app, and you've got to have a car available for when you need it to go and visit your sick aunt who lives out of town. We're not anti-mobility, it's got to be an incredible clean service that's available, or it won't work. We're not trying to deprive people of mobility, we're just trying to get it in the right place.
And I think, of course, when we think about how this new neighbourhood connects to the wider town, we think of it physically, and travel is one of the components of that. But of course, I think as a principle and as an ethos, the whole, that is one of our big areas where we want to really lean into this. It is a new neighbourhood, but it's part of an existing, extremely well-established town, our hometown. So we need to take that question on every aspect of what we're doing here, physically, culturally, and economically.
Just one other example, if I may, just quickly, because I know we need to finish. But in it, we have this circle of impact thing, which is our framework for sustainability. And one of the ways a place like this can have impact is we get to choose the commercial enterprises that go into the places that we own. It's weird, right? So maybe all our cafes and our restaurants should be connected to fields in regenerative farms in the area, so that we're getting local seasonal produce. Maybe one of them is called a community canteen. It just offers 2 dishes a day that are incredibly affordable, seasonal, local, primarily vegetarian, that pretty much anyone in Lewes can afford. And if they can't, that you might leave some money behind the till if you can, so that so it becomes a proper community canteen. But what it's doing is it's stimulating regenerative agriculture in the wider area. There's another connection. Our own internal timetable is we submit a planning application in the spring next year. So we'll be having another major public consultation probably at the beginning of next year. It won't be as big as this one, because this is capable of shaping the thing. So we'll feed back to you what we've heard, and then if you sign up for our newsletter or whatever, then we can keep you connected to news about what's happening as the scheme evolves. So submission in spring next year, maybe 6 months to determine it. So by the end of next year, we'll know what kind of consent. And it can be killed by a planning consent that has a weird set of conditions. It could be killed at that point. We might appeal if we lose, or we own the land, so we might just hold on to the land for 20 years and let it flood and not have any social housing. It's fine. It's not fine. It's really not fine. But the point is, it needs to happen quite quickly. And actually, why shouldn't it now? Because we've got all the technical information from years and years, and there have been all sorts of iterative master plans and so on. So it is time to get on with it. I think everyone feels that. It's got to be great, but we've got to get on with it. And then we reckon it's 8 years as a project, but you start really quickly. We've got to put the flood defences in first, and some basic infrastructure. But once we start building, because we've segmented the market, so it's not like one type of housing for one price band. We're not, in real estate terms, you're not eating your own market. You're not trying to sell to the same narrow universe of people. And we're not trying to sell You know, the last scheme had a load of big townhouses. They're £1 million in Lewis these days. I mean, it took 20 years to sell those, even if you thought it was a good idea to do it. You'll see here, I think it's a much more democratic thing to do. There are a lot of apartments. There's a lot of demand for 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, for people starting out in life, people downsizing. It's a great place for that. And that means that many more people can be housed. You know, we think of British apartments and we're all like crossing ourselves because they're usually hideous. In Scandinavia, it's a desired way of living, just to get the proportions right, the airflow right, the natural light, the public amenity. When you get those things right, they're a wonderful condition. So we can build quite quickly once we get going. And I have to say, one of the exciting things about this event is the number of people that want to live here. I mean, really, you know, people literally coming up and putting their name down for stuff. We haven't even got a list yet.
Great. Well, thank you. I think that's hopefully a good practical note to end on.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.